Hello, everyone. Thank you for making the decision to spend some time with us today in our webinar titled Making Data Work for You. I'm Megan Huss, the director of the OPM's Process and Performance Improvement Program in HR Solutions Center for Leadership Development. In an effort to recognize such an important time during Public Service Recognition Week, we want to thank you for all that you do in service to our nation. And as you know, the American people count on the federal government every single day. Within our mission in the Center for Leadership Development, we focus on developing visionary leaders to transform government. And for over 50 years, we've helped agencies meet their workforce education and development needs through interagency classes, customized programs, online training solutions, and project-based learning initiatives. In getting started, I'd like to share a little bit about the Process and Performance Improvement Program, also referred to as PPIP. We focus on developing and leading trainings, customized workshops, and project-based learning initiatives that directly support the government-wide focus on reskilling staff and building capacity in our public sector organizations to design and execute a variety of improvement initiatives. In our continuously evolving environment, the ability for us to shift time and energy from low value to high value work for individuals and organizations is more critical than ever before. We hope you'll be able to apply information you learned in this webinar back in your organizations and that you will continue to expand your knowledge and skill set. Our interactive programs focus on improving efficiency and effectiveness of your organization's processes by teaching and applying essential tools and techniques in problem solving, root cause analysis, and the ability to make data-driven decisions. Today, we will be setting the stage for conveying complex information and helping to support decision-making by utilizing a technique we call data storytelling. As we move through the webinar today, I'll be posing a few questions for your consideration, and then I'll be talking through the feedback and responses we received during our live session. So the first question is, what does storytelling mean to you? And now we'll work through some of the responses that we received. So we had a note that storytelling meant building relationships for one individual. It meant presenting a better picture and engaging the listener to others, making something relatable, connecting using those personal experiences, painting a mental picture, engaging, taking you to a different place, sharing perspectives, going beyond facts, actually connecting with your audience. Again, another note for illustrating a situation. Plot, characters, and point of view. Really understanding your audience. Connecting the dots. So painting that picture of the journey and the sequence of events that took place to get to the point in the story that we're at now. A way of organizing and relaying information in an interesting way. Actually entertaining our audience. Providing some of that context around what the data or what the other information we're sharing means. This could include visually representing something, conveying matters of the heart rather than just the facts. Again, with sharing information, explaining, and communicating with an audience. Bringing in those personal experiences. And then building relationships and that common understanding. You'll see a few of the key themes that we wanted to highlight that I'll be covering today during our time during this webinar. The first is really learning what data storytelling is, and then focusing on the why individuals would choose to use it, why we would engage in data storytelling in general. The second objective is to really highlight the three main components of all data stories, and this can be found across numerous research articles, various forums, and kind of looking across the spectrum of information available and determining what those critical elements are to actually have a valuable data story. Then we're going to begin learning about the process and the actual steps for building our own data story. And then we'll move into understanding how we can utilize data storytelling to support our decision making. Question for your consideration, which is really, what is data storytelling? What does that mean to you when you hear that phrase? So now you'll see kind of us moving from the more generic of storytelling with narratives and just painting that picture to what this might look like actually including data with that story. So we have our initial response of providing a visual for data. Showing growth, actually explaining the process and the journey that we've went through, as well as the results and the outcomes. Using those numbers and figures, using dashboards, comparisons, actually making the data relatable by our utilization of visuals. Being able to show the return on investment. Using data to justify a particular position. Providing the context, the insights that we're able to garner from the data analysis that we've conducted. Showing that trend information and where the patterns and themes are beginning to emerge. And really it's a way to uncomplicate information and kind of unpack what that data set might mean. Giving an overview of an idea. Explaining some of the anomalies that we have within the data set. Utilizing graphs and charts, infographics, and again, another note about explaining information and a way to interpret and bridge that gap between the actual data set, the analysis, and what the meaning and what the potential outcome or proposed solutions are from those efforts. And then using data to illustrate the plan and to really show that journey that we're on. What is data storytelling? So as we examine a variety of resources, and as you begin to do your own research in this area, we have some common themes that begin to emerge from this continuously growing field. For example, you'll see 3 definitions included here, and we can identify areas like conveying critical information, conveying critical insights, and utilizing data to provide that context and that important information that's surrounding our particular data set or our findings. We also see that it can be utilized to actually inspire your audience to act, inspire them to make decisions, move forward with solutions. Another common theme that we've seen across data storytelling definitions is actually the ability to communicate those insights. So again, bridging that gap between the actual analysis that was conducted, what the data set in and of itself is telling us, and then how we reach those very specific audiences or target groups, and how we explain maybe what the changes are, what the trends are that we're actually seeing from the data. On this slide, you'll see responses to the question posed, what private and public sector organizations have you seen use data storytelling effectively? One of the responses that came in was the stock market or investment firms. So as we think about apps to track various markets with links to articles and stories, we could begin to see the impact of various market changes and trends. We also have fitness trackers. So thinking about how we choose the most important criteria, for example, for ourselves to see quickly at a glance that will then ultimately become the story of your activity for the day. Or it could become the story of your sleep for the night, or your heart rate, or other variables that help you reflect on the day. This can also then be rolled up, for example, to paint a picture about how well we're sleeping over a certain period of time. And then we can compare that to others, or what the standards are for healthy allotments of sleep and exercise. We have credit monitoring. So as you know, many of the financial institutions provide these types of services for free now, and we're able to quickly create that credit story or that credit history that we can see visually, see changes visually, and then assess where we fall in comparison to others. Another common private sector example is music service apps. So they send us these recaps that we receive via email, and they're really just these short stories that pull together the interesting statistics. For example, highlighting that we chose to listen to up-and-coming artists before they gained significant popularity, almost conveying that we were in some part linked to their newfound success. So if you think about this example, that's a much more effective way to convey the music service value that's being added, rather than simply sending us a thanks for your commitment to using our service, or a thank you message along with our monthly invoices. Another common example is ride-sharing apps that many of us use frequently. So they use data storytelling to communicate not only annually, but also on a monthly basis with customers. So instead of doing that recap email, just showing the total amount of money spent, for example, they've shifted the conversation to show us how much value the service is actually delivered to riders. So showcasing those personalized statistics of our experiences within the app and utilizing the service. So then this jogs your memory about how many different destinations you visited, or maybe what you were doing when you frequently went back to one particular destination. And then moving over into some of our public sector examples. So if you look to the right side of this slide, you'll see, for example, COVID infection rates. And as we think about COVID statistics, that's something that we regularly see in the news and see in articles. And we could simply have an infographic paired with a short paragraph that would be able to quickly convey a feeling along with the actual data and results that are being highlighted. We can glance at this for a very short period of time and then really process those insights quickly and understand some additional insights that may have been otherwise overlooked or even almost lost in the sea of data and information that we're consistently finding ourselves in. Another example is water quality. So not only sharing the results, for example, what this might be in a particular region or particular area, but then also conveying the importance and the impact that this might have on individuals and specific communities. And then we can go kind of one step beyond that, actually using visuals to convey some of the mitigation strategies or the improvement initiatives that are taking place to improve the quality in certain regions. So really painting that picture of what water quality means to various individuals and groups, and then how that's directly impacting their lives. Looking at birth rates across regions and different times of day, for example. So this could be displayed with simple visuals and links to the impact that birth rates have on school populations or daycares within a particular region of the country or of the world. So now I'd like to take a few moments and have you consider why you think data storytelling is really so effective. And you'll see our responses from the live session here with individuals noting that numbers capture attention, that at least two different senses are engaged. Really visualizing and being able to provide graphics around those numbers, helping to engage others. Raw data is boring, and I think that can be argued by a variety of stakeholders. Actually creating a message that sticks. So looking at the data, the information, understanding what that means, and then understanding the context and how we can actually move towards action from the data set and from the analyses that were conducted. So painting that full-scale picture, thinking about the critical context that may be missing if we were just to provide a report with the facts and stats, but didn't provide the necessary narrative or the context around those statistics. Looking for trends. We have the ability to actually uncover insights from the data that we would not have been able to otherwise see. Increasing trust and transparency. So really taking a look at the audience that we're trying to reach and helping them understand at the appropriate level and helping to convey information in a way that's actually relatable to them. And making the information feel like it matters, making sure that people understand why this data is significant or what the outcomes are showing us, whether it's in today's current state or whether it be more of the predictive information and kind of projecting potential scenarios that may be coming up in the future. So now that we've talked through some of the pull responses to why data storytelling works, we're going to dive a bit deeper into this topic. So really, if you were to consider one of the most important themes out of why data storytelling actually does work and why it is so effective, is that key component. It's the why. So if we think about putting data in dashboards, for example, or spreadsheets or flat reports, we're actually telling about the what's taking place, but we're not diving into why that might be taking place. Even if they are assumptions that we want to recognize, or even if they are potential scenarios or simply hypotheses, we're able with data storytelling to explore the why and uncovering kind of some of the additional information behind what's happening. So oftentimes, I think many of us have probably experienced this, that when presenting data or presenting a report, that we actually just receive more requests for additional data, requests for additional information that may not be present in that. And that often is a good sign to tell us that we didn't provide enough context and we didn't provide enough potential information about future actions that could be taken or potential solutions or very specific insights that can be garnered from that data set. So data actually holds tremendous amounts of potential value is a way that I like to look at this, but that value cannot really be created or realized unless those insights are actually uncovered and unless we're translating that into action and into business outcomes. So one of the ways that we like to use this and a good way to think about data storytelling is actually just looking at TED Talks and the slogan of ideas worth spreading. An analysis of over 500 TED Talks actually showed us that stories made up 65% of the content. And so if we think about what our objective is in watching a particular TED Talk, it would be for those quick wins, those tidbits, those immediate takeaways that we could put into action. And we can see how powerful that is by utilizing stories in that particular area. So they tend to be memorable, persuasive, engaging, and that's something that a lot of us are drawn to. So data storytelling, if we get to kind of the heart of why this works, is it actually capitalizes on the brain's preference for stories over data. So it's easier for us to remember stories, and this method is actually rooted in the ability to kind of link and create those connections with the emotional aspect of a story, which can then engage multiple parts of our brain. So it's easier to recall those pieces when they fit together in a journey or in a particular story. And so when we package up those data insights, we actually build that bridge for the data to become influential. And this is something I've mentioned throughout the webinar, but how we actually move from talking about the facts, the stats, to moving towards action and moving towards decision making and supporting that movement forward of what can actually be done with this critical information or these critical insights that were uncovered. So we found through the research, and neuroscience has reported that we actually activate a significant number more parts of our brain when we are involving data and stories together, and we are including them in that one cohesive unit for the reasons mentioned, that it involves emotions, or that it actually includes context that's important for people to understand, and thinking about how they can remember some of those elements of attending a number of briefings in one day. So a quote that I think may be common to some others related to this is really thinking about the fact that people hear statistics, but they really feel stories. So if there's a way that we can involve and kind of intertwine those, we have that powerful, almost unstoppable force with the data kind of backing the information and the story. So we're able to simplify that complex information. It's really another key component of why this works, and a key part of why data storytelling is effective, is that in this universe of so much information and so much data, and looking at the volumes of data that is produced and that is shared on a regular basis and that we actually all have access to, data storytelling as a way to simplify that and distill this down to the most critical information. And a way that I like to think about this is really distilling the information down, distilling the data, the key insights, but also reducing the noise that people experience around the data or around the particular story or focus area that we're talking about. And then, as I mentioned, really being able to move people towards making decisions, towards taking actions, even if that is just a consideration of various scenarios or potential future solutions. I'd like to move to the next question for your consideration, which is really how much has the data science career field grown over the last 5 years? So you'll see in the poll responses, we had a number of enthusiastic responses with, exponential growth, that it's doubled, that it's tripled, quantum leaps, and a really good point that it has actually gotten overwhelming for some, which is kind of makes the point of why data storytelling is even more critical, so that we are able to reach a larger audience and a more diverse kind of targeted groups of people to help them understand at the particular level or within the context that they operate. So now we're going to move into what you think the main elements of data storytelling are. So I'd like everyone to take a moment, think about that, and then I'll walk through some of the responses that we had in the poll. But when we think about those key elements, one that comes to mind frequently is really understanding the audience, highlighting what matters the most, as we talked about, those key insights, distilling down this information to the most critical aspect of what we would like to convey to a very specific target audience. Having accurate data, exactly, that's such a critical component of doing this. Identifying a problem and then setting the stage. So making sure that we're not conveying flat information, but rather we're trying to solve a problem, or we're trying to create a shared understanding around a particular issue or a challenge, or even just something that's taking place so that we can show trends of what this looks like over time. The validity and reliability of the actual data set. Making the data relatable, including visuals. Again, making sure that our data is accurate. And then that targeted messaging. So one data story, out of a particular data set is not going to be applicable to all audiences. And that's really a key component that we want to remember, is that this should be something that's designed, crafted, in a very specific way for a specific target audience, so that we are able to reach and create that shared understanding in a variety of different groups and a variety of levels, but really taking into account what's most important to a particular group of individuals or stakeholders. So we are moving on to those three components of data storytelling. If you think back to what some of the responses were on the prior slide, we've touched on a lot of these from individuals' input. But really, if we think about data storytelling, it can be interpreted as simply just visualizing the data. However, it's really important to consider how much more data storytelling is than just creating those lovely visuals and data charts. So it's really our structured approach for communicating those data insights and helping to bridge that gap between those that may have collected or analyzed the data and those that will be making critical decisions based on it. So there's really three key components as we look across the research and across the information in this area. And that's including the data and the data analysis, the visualizations, as well as our storyline and our narrative. So when we think about the actual data and the analysis, we want to be sure that we're recognizing kind of the limitations of that data set, and really understanding what that data is truly telling us without trying to apply that external story before going through the rigorous process of the analysis and actual interpretation. So really trying to dig into the data and understanding that first, and then creating the story around that that will help convey those facts, those insights to others most effectively. So utilizing the narrative and the storyline is a way to think about how we convey the journey and how we actually connect the dots for individuals of kind of why this data was initially collected, what the importance of it might be, additional insights related to the data, and then really providing context for them to understand and appreciate the data. So some individuals like to say this is kind of giving voice to that data, and really understanding that each data point can be a character in that story, if you will. And then the visualizations, ensuring that we are utilizing charts, tables, graphs in the most appropriate and concise manner. When visuals are applied to data, they can often enlighten and provide audiences with insights that we wouldn't be able to see otherwise without utilizing those tools. And then when we merge that with the narrative, we're actually able to even, I think this came up in a prior response, but even entertain the audience or really catch them and create that story that involves emotional linkages and really committing some of these things that are going on with the data to memory based on creating those linkages in our data story. And then the important piece about the visualizations and that last element of data storytelling is to really ensure that we're utilizing these visuals intentionally. So if it's not adding direct value, let's not include the photograph or an additional graphic, but making sure that it's directly supporting that story and that information that we're trying to convey, and really the most relatable and the most applicable to the particular target audience. Next slide, which talks through some of the responses that we received on how we might simplify those charts and graphs. So I think that we've all probably read very in-depth reports that have a significant number of charts and graphs and many analyses that were conducted over large data sets, but really thinking through what has the most impact on the audience, what will be most effective in kind of distilling the noise and conveying that critical information to them, and not letting this be bogged down or watered down in a sea of a variety of charts or graphs. So we have a point here about including only the critical points necessary, reducing the amount of charts or graphs that are used if they're not directly adding value, combining, so maybe we don't have to have the data stratified in 25 different ways and then all conveyed on their individual charts. Not overusing different effects. This is a good thought, and really just looking at if it's just because it's available doesn't mean that you need to use it, and really looking at what's most effective at conveying that target message. Continuously putting yourself in the audience's shoes. So what types of information might you want to know? What type of chart or graph or visualization would be most effective, thinking about the kind of most important factors to your target audience. This is a great point about standardizing the format. So really looking at how we can eliminate or reduce some of that noise that's taking place in this report or in this particular data story, so that folks aren't having to use their mental energy in that direction. Not trying to capture too many data types. Using neutral colors, exactly. Removing the fluff. So removing the fluff, removing the noise, and really taking a look at just maintaining the most critical elements, the most critical points and visualizations to move that target audience towards action or towards decisions. So when we think about building this data story, where would we start with that? What is the most critical elements in this process, and thinking through how we might go about actually building a data story, as soon as tomorrow or as soon as next week, back in your individual organizations. So our responses showed finding a data source, determining what conclusions you'd like to share, identifying the business problem or the challenge that you're trying to address, starting with questions and not just jumping to those potential responses or what you think might be the answers. Assessing the relevance, so really taking a look at what's most critical to this target audience. Figuring out the best way to tell the story. So taking a look at your target audience, what data is available, what potential insights can be drawn from that, and then how you package that in a way that's most effective. Process what those steps look like. And so one important element to consider here is actually looking at the fact that, so uncovering those key insights, uncovering the key elements of your data set is one very important skill. But another important skill is really communicating those insights and communicating what that data means, and helping to bridge that gap between the actual analysis and the target audience. So this is a really critical skill and a really critical area that we see as important now, but also very much in our future federal workforce. And being able to provide that context and provide that linkage to, how we utilize data, but then also how we move that towards creating a shared understanding, interpreting, and actually able to make decisions based on that information. So as we look at the process for building a data story, one of the key components is really beginning with that question or issue. So ensuring that we're figuring out kind of what the pain is that we're trying to resolve, or what particular question is being asked, whether it be by the public, by a leadership team, by other individuals, and then addressing that first, so that everything that we're doing, after the data analysis and after the interpretation of what the data is truly telling us, is geared towards answering that question, is geared towards providing additional insights around that particular issue. Then looking at really understanding our stakeholders and adjusting to that audience. So first taking a look at, who are we actually trying to reach with our message? And then really, what does this individual group or these individuals care about the most? What are their goals? What are they trying to accomplish? And then making sure that this fits within the audience's current level of knowledge. And that, if our audience is internal, that we're really conveying things that are most appropriate to that particular group, to be able to move their strategy forward. Or when they're external, is the objective maybe to persuade customers, or is it to encourage individuals to adapt new solutions? So really thinking about what the intention is and what the particular audience is for our data story. And then setting that stage and describing the context. So this is a very important skill to be able to utilize. And one of the areas that we had talked about is it's so important to provide that context for appropriate interpretation and appropriate future action based on the data set and based on those analyses. But then it's also just as important that we kind of be concise and distill that information down to the most critical and most important for this particular target audience to know and understand, so that we are, one of the poll responses was eliminating the fluff, right? And that we're actually reducing the noise that people experience on a daily basis. And then be sure that we're really ending with the actual insights and the solutions. So this is really our call to action, and we want to make sure that as you're leaving this webinar today, that this is one of the key elements that you take away in building a data story, and the effectiveness and why we go about utilizing this technique, is that really ending that story with kind of what we're asking of the particular audience. And so clearly defining what the insights were, potential solutions, potential next steps, but making that as straightforward as possible so that others are able to make decisions more quickly, or that we're able to take actions, move towards potential solutions and options. So again, thinking about ways that we can go about developing a better understanding of our audience and really adjusting to those various stakeholder groups. Some of the responses to the poll question included doing additional research, might be holding focus groups. We could interview individuals or groups, conducting polls, Learning and understanding what individuals' pain points are. What is their objective for learning about this data? Holding discussions, conducting short surveys. So really asking what individuals want to see from the data, or what particular needs they have from the data story. And then focusing on what they intend to do with the information next. And if this is developing and implementing potential solutions, what information might they need to clearly understand and then be able to articulate to others. So now we're moving into we've talked through the process of building the data story, talked about how we can better understand our audience, and then we're moving into thinking about how we move that really towards action and how we support our decision making. So increasing transparency is an important element in the data analysis, interpretation, but also how we convey and communicate this information to create that shared understanding. Providing key facts in a clear way. Sharing lessons learned. We have the ability to mitigate risk based on the data that was collected, the analyses, and then really painting that picture for potential future scenarios. We're also able to provide that 30,000 foot view of the information by including elements of the key context that others would need to understand to have an appropriate impression and interpretation of the data. Understanding the allocation of resources that are needed for potential solutions moving forward. And then projecting out those future trends. So as I mentioned, creating those scenarios and painting the picture for various solutions, various paths that could be taken after fully understanding the data and the analyses that were conducted. So now we'll be diving in a bit deeper to how we use data storytelling to actually support decision making and drive action forward. And a few of the key elements here that I wanted to be sure to highlight in this webinar were actually around the fact that no matter how good our data set is, and no matter how great the insights that are gathered from the analyses and our findings, none of that is kind of reaching or achieving its potential full value without being able to support individuals either taking action, making decisions, or really understanding the information and the data. So looking at this as that critical element to bridge the important work that's been done on the front end with the data collection and analysis, but then really creating that strong bridge to how we take action. So as we talked about, one of the key elements to that is really providing context so that individuals have an accurate impression and interpretation of the findings and of the results that were shown through the analyses. And then if you want people to make those the most correct decisions, really thinking about helping them understand in the greatest possible way. So really targeting what the information needs are, what the level of understanding is of your particular audience related to the data set that you're speaking about, because we understand that we do have there is potential biases that are incorporated into analyses and into interpretations. So really recognizing that and attempting to limit that, and at a minimum, including that as assumptions or potential biases that are included. So that's an important part of that context, to really recognize and allow the audience to see the data in its most honest, transparent form. And then looking at how we are really able to share the insights and how we're able to convey that information in the most kind of concise and the most distilled down way with the least amount of noise, so that any of these key findings or these key insights that we want to ensure others are able to move forward on quickly and make decisions, take actions, assess potential future scenarios, that's not being clouded by additional background noise and additional information or data that's not directly relevant to what this particular target audience needs. And now we'll move into the review and wrap up of this webinar. And I'd like to highlight some of the key concepts that we covered today. I also want to thank everyone for their ideas and active engagement during our live session. So as a recap, we focused on really what data storytelling is and our natural preferences for stories and our ability to capitalize on that. Looking at how we utilize techniques to support our efforts and translate those metrics and statistics into relatable information for very specific audiences or stakeholder groups, as well as simplifying complex information into those bite-sized stories that individuals can really understand, and importantly, that they can remember to then share with others. So then we moved into the main components of data storytelling, and that includes the actual data analysis, the narrative, the visual, and recognize the importance of employing responsible and ethical data analysis techniques and accounting for any of those assumptions as often as we can. So really looking at that as the core foundation, because we never want to kind of create that story and then fit the data into it, but rather the true and most honest form of the data analysis that we can get to is what should be driving the narrative that's developed. And then creating that storyline and connecting the dots for the journey of a particular audience to help with their perspectives, help create that shared understanding. And then developing visualizations so that we can truly understand the value in utilizing charts or tables and looking at how those can most effectively be used for a specific group and potentially used to display additional patterns or themes, gain additional insights that may have not been highly visible prior to creating those visuals. And then I moved into covering the process and the specific steps of how we can go about building a data story ourselves. So we focused on starting with that key question, that key issue that we'd like to address, and then really understanding the stakeholders, understanding how we might adjust to the audience, setting the stage and describing the context, and then moving straight into those clear and concise descriptions. And being sure that we're ending with insights, solutions, options, so that we've created that strong bridge between the data set, the analyses that were conducted, as well as potential scenarios, solutions, actions that can be taken as a result of those findings. And then last, we emphasized moving people from the actual understanding of the information and the analyses to the actual ability to take action, make decisions. And so really ensuring that we're providing relevant context, but that we are avoiding that information overload, and that we're sharing those most relevant insights to our decision-making stakeholders and helping others to understand what potential actions could be taken in the future. I'd like to leave you with some additional information about OPM's Process and Performance Improvement Program and how you can reach my team directly. To learn more about our training and project-based learning programs and initiatives, or just to ask questions about how you can continue to expand your skill set, feel free to email us anytime at lean6sigma@opm.gov, or you can navigate to the go.usa.gov website on the last slide of today's presentation. I want to take this opportunity to again express my appreciation for taking the time to attend this webinar today. We hope that you gained some ideas to bring back to the workplace, and we are always here to partner with our federal colleagues whenever needed. Thank you.